We sign contracts all the time, and we pretty much assume they're set in stone. But what if they're not? What if there's some kind of hidden flaw, a legal crack in the foundation that could make the entire agreement just crumble? Well, today, we're diving into the 5 key vitiating factors that can do exactly that.
Come on, we've all been there, right? You sign on the dotted line, and that little voice in your head kicks in, asking, uh-oh, did I just make a huge mistake? Well, as it turns out, sometimes the law actually agrees with you. Let's find out when and why.
So think of a contract like a building. For it to be solid, you need a strong foundation, and that foundation is genuine agreement. But what happens if that foundation has a crack in it from the get-go? Well, those cracks can taint the whole agreement, making the entire structure pretty unstable. In the legal world, these cracks have a name: vitiating factors. The word vitiate literally means to spoil or corrupt something. So these are the legally recognized problems that are so serious they can spoil a contract from the inside out. They make it unenforceable, or what the law calls void or voidable. And trust me, that's a huge difference we're going to unpack at the end.
So how does the law even identify these cracks? Well, luckily, it gives us a really clear framework. There are 5, count 'em, 5 key vitiating factors that can totally undermine a contract, and we're about to walk through every single one.
And here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at mistake, misrepresentation, duress, undue influence, and finally, illegality. Each one of these can be the reason a deal that looks totally solid on the surface just falls apart.
All right, let's kick things off with the first category. This is all about those situations where one or even both parties are working with the wrong information. This is where the reality of the deal just doesn't match up with what was actually agreed upon.
Imagine this classic scenario, right? You think you're buying a priceless masterpiece. The seller thinks they're selling one. The entire deal is built on that one fundamental assumption. But what happens when you get it appraised and discover it's just a really clever fake? Well, this brings us to our very first vitiating factor: mistake.
Now, in legal terms, a mistake isn't just, buyer's remorse. It can't be, I changed my mind. It has to be a fundamental error about the contract's terms, or maybe who you're even dealing with, or, like in our painting example, the very heart and soul of what you're buying.
Okay, now let's look at a slightly different situation. Here, it's not just some mutual misunderstanding. Someone has actively told you something that isn't true to get you to make the deal.
And this is what we call misrepresentation. The key thing here is that it's an untrue statement of fact, not just someone's opinion like, this is the best car ever. It's a specific claim made to lure you into the contract. It's basically the bait on the hook that gets you to sign.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because the law actually cares about why the false statement was made. Was it an innocent mistake, where the person genuinely thought it was true? Was it negligent, meaning they were just kind of careless and didn't bother to check their facts? Or was it fraudulent? They knew they were lying. As you can see, the intent completely changes the consequences. It determines whether you can just cancel the contract or if you can also sue for damages.
Okay, let's move on to our next set of factors. These are less about the facts of the deal and more about the state of mind of the people making it. This is where consent isn't genuine because free will has basically been taken right out of the equation. Yeah, this image says it all, doesn't it? It's a scary scenario, and thankfully pretty rare, but it perfectly illustrates a crucial point. When you sign a contract under a threat like this, you're not actually giving consent. You're just trying to stop something bad from happening. You have no real choice. The law calls this duress. It's when someone is literally forced into a contract against their will through threats or actual violence. And the law quite rightly says a signature you get this way isn't worth the paper it's printed on. Consent has to be given freely, period. But what about pressure that isn't a direct threat of harm? This situation is way more subtle. It's not about fear of violence, but about the abuse of a special relationship, one that's built on trust.
This slide really nails the difference between duress and our next factor, undue influence. Duress is about coercion, a direct, unlawful threat. Undue influence, though, is much more subtle. It's about manipulation. It happens when someone abuses a position of trust, think a doctor and a patient, or an advisor and their client, to unfairly talk them into a deal. The person's will isn't broken by a threat, it's bent by misplaced trust. And as you can probably guess, proving this kind of manipulation can be incredibly tough.
So we've covered bad information and we've covered bad consent. What's left? Well, our final factor isn't about the parties at all. It's about the subject of the contract itself. Some agreements, well, they're just off limits from the very start.
And that factor is illegality. This one's pretty straightforward. If the whole point of your contract is to do something illegal or something that harms society, the courts will simply refuse to get involved. They are not going to help you enforce a forbidden deal.
The examples here really speak for themselves. Obviously, you can't have a legally binding contract to commit a crime, but the idea of illegality is a bit broader than that. It also covers contracts that are considered against public policy, things that might not be strictly criminal but are just seen as bad for society, like an agreement that promotes corruption.
Okay, so we've gone through the 5 factors that can taint a contract. But what's the actual consequence here? When one of these is proven, does the contract just vanish into thin air? The answer is, it depends.
And this difference is absolutely crucial. On one side, a contract can be void. Think of this as a complete nothing burger. It's legally treated as if it never ever existed. On the other side, a contract can be voidable. This means the contract is actually valid until the wronged party decides to cancel it. They get the choice. They can either go through with the deal or they can void it. The power is in their hands. When you boil it all down, it comes back to this one powerful idea. Every single vitiating factor we've talked about today, from a simple mistake to outright duress, is a situation where that genuine consent is missing.
And that is the most important thing to take away from all this. A contract isn't an unbreakable prison. The law understands that for an agreement to be fair, it has to be entered into freely, with the right information, and for a legal purpose. These factors are basically the legal system's built-in escape hatch.
So, with all this in your back pocket, just think about all the agreements you enter into, from the digital terms of service you click on every day to major life decisions. The principles of genuine consent, they're everywhere. What are you going to be paying a little more attention to now?